A year has passed since we started living here in our new 5-room house. There's no room for you here. Upon returning home and storing the groceries in the refrigerator, I headed to my room, only to find my belongings nowhere in sight. Standing in disbelief, I heard my mother-in-law and sister-in-law chuckling behind me. Following my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law declared, "We'll be using this space from now on, so please leave," leaving me utterly astonished. It seems my belongings were moved elsewhere by them. "Where did you take my things to?" I asked, only to be met with their laughter. "They're in a storage unit. If you don't collect them within a week, we'll dispose of them," they responded, with my mother-in-law tossing a paper with the storage details at me. Catching the fluttering paper, I looked at my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. Now, only the three of us were in the house, and confronting them would mean a certain defeat. Thus, my only option was to leave. "Understood. Take care." With those words, I gathered my remaining belongings and returned to my parents' home. However, I couldn't just do nothing. Since my mother-in-law and sister-in-law seemed oblivious, they were bound to face consequences. My name is Mandy. Currently, I'm living with my husband, Fred, in a new 5-room house. We met in college, sharing the same major and year. Furthermore, we were in the same literary club, which quickly brought us closer. Fred had started living alone upon entering university, and though I visited his place several times, it was always immaculate. One day, I remarked, "Your room is always so tidy, Fred. It's very comfortable." He bashfully confessed, "Actually, my mom and sister aren't good at cleaning. But my dad and I like things neat, so we took on the cleaning and got quite good at it." At that moment, I complimented his cleanliness, unaware of how indifferent his mother and sister were. This became apparent only after we started working, saved up for marriage, and eventually tied the knot. Shortly after our marriage, we decided to visit our families during Christmas, starting with Fred's parents. That's when I realized that Fred's tidiness wasn't just a preference but a necessity due to his mother's and sister's lack of concern compelling him and his father to clean. Perhaps because of Christmas, chocolate packets littered the hallway, and finished orange peels were scattered on the floor. Though I was about to say "excuse me," I froze in place. Fred, equally shocked, suggested, "Let's go out for a meal, just Dad and us." He proposed visiting a friend's restaurant that was open during Christmas, taking his father and me there. The three of us enjoyed a delicious meal, momentarily forgetting the state of the family home. Unexpectedly, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, Amy, showed up at the restaurant, questioning, "Why did you leave us behind?" "That's cruel." Fred, visibly upset, retorted, "We didn't invite you to. Besides, how can you be okay with such a dirty house?" The two women exchanged glances. Their glamorous attire starkly contrasted the cluttered hallway, so I pondered how they could be so meticulous about their appearance yet neglect their home's cleanliness. Amy excused herself, saying, "Dad always takes care of the cleaning, doesn't he?" However, Fred's father retorted with a heavy sigh, "Do you expect me to clean while I'm down with a fever on Christmas Eve? You neglect to take care of me and mess up the house during the holidays." Both my mother-in-law and Amy seemed accustomed to being scolded and remained unfazed. I couldn't sympathize with them for neglecting Fred's sick father and leaving the house in disarray. Considering Fred's father's aging, I doubted he could continue taking care of them indefinitely. I was deeply concerned about his future. After visiting Fred's family, I stopped by my parents' home, then discussed with Fred, "Shouldn't your father consider separating from your mother and Amy?" Fred seemed to sense something was off, given their negligence during his father's illness, and pondered, "Indeed, my father might be thinking of divorce, but starting a new life." An idea then struck me. "I've mentioned it before, but why don't we ask if your father would like to live with us?" Initially taken aback, Fred quickly grasped the idea, asking, "Really? We have enough rooms, but are you sure?" "I'll ask him," I said, reaching out to someone. This person was my cousin, whom I've been close to for years. 3 years older than me, he has always treated me like a sister and has been a confidant. It was his suggestion to invite Fred's father to live with us. The plan progressed smoothly, and eventually, we welcomed only Fred's father into our new 5-room house. He had severed ties with Amy and her mother, leaving his house, already divorced from his wife and with the family home being her property. He needed no formalities to move out. Fred's father hesitantly said, "I haven't disclosed this address to my wife or Amy. They won't come here, right? And to think I can live in such a wonderful house." We warmly welcomed him, assuring, "We're happy to live together with you. Please make yourself at home." Fred added, "Leave the cleaning to Mandy and me. We won't make unnecessary messes." To welcome him. At that time, we believed there would be no further involvement with his ex-wife and Amy. However, 9 months after moving in, my mother-in-law unexpectedly showed up with her belongings, declaring, "I'll be living here from today." We were stunned she knew our address and inadvertently let her in with her sudden arrival. We conveyed to her the difficulty of living together, but she resisted, clinging to the sofa. "I can't return to my former home. How cruel to drive me out." We were all astonished by her childish behavior. Her claim of being unable to return home piqued our curiosity. What had happened? And if she couldn't live in the family home, where was Amy? We assumed she was with her mother. Upon inquiring, it turned out that due to frequent complaints about odors, dirtiness, and uncleanliness at the family home, my mother-in-law decided to sell it. Meanwhile, Amy, planning to live in a new apartment with her mother, found a boyfriend and opted to move in with him, leaving her mother behind. The sale of the house was decided, and my mother-in-law had spread the word among relatives. Upon hearing our story, a relative, driven by a peculiar sense of justice, claimed a son should take care of his mother, blaming us for my mother-in-law's predicament, and ended up disclosing our new address to her. Fred frowned at this development, suggesting, "Let's not share our new address with relatives anymore," a sentiment I agreed with. Indeed, the main reason my mother-in-law had to sell her house was her and Amy's neglect of cleaning. After the divorce, with my father-in-law gone, the 2 remaining women's lack of cleanliness likely turned the home into a trash-filled mess. This led to constant complaints from neighbors, prompting my mother-in-law to seek our help. My father-in-law stated, "I have no intention of living with her after the divorce," and left the house. He had been considering moving out, and my mother-in-law's unexpected visit hastened his decision. After his departure, my mother-in-law became more overbearing, demanding Fred's support instead of the traitor. I grew concerned about the future, feeling this arrangement might not last. 2 months into her stay, I began to feel overwhelmed by my mother-in-law's presence. She would boast on the phone to Amy, "I'm living comfortably here with 2 cleaners at my service. It's great without that man." Amy's reaction was unclear, but it was evident that my mother-in-law looked down on us. She didn't contribute to household chores or finances, and referring to us as cleaners was unacceptable. I couldn't hide my irritation and asked my mother-in-law, "Perhaps it's time you start doing something new?" She was taken aback, responding with a perplexed "What?" For her, the sudden critique from someone she looked down upon as a mere cleaner might have wounded her pride. She aggressively replied, "What do you mean? I am your husband's mother. Fred, as my eldest son, has a duty to support me. As a daughter-in-law, you should care for and assist me." But I was not one to back down easily. There's no law mandating an eldest son to take care of his mother. You've divorced your husband and lived with Amy. Since Amy has always been by your side, it's natural for you to live with her. If that's difficult, you should consider living alone. You're still healthy and have enough energy to shout, I counted. My mother-in-law's face turned red with anger. My advice, from someone she deemed inferior, infuriated her further. 3 months after her move-in and a year since we bought our new 5-room house, my mother-in-law took an unbelievable action. Returning home and storing groceries, I found my belongings missing. Behind me, my mother-in-law and Amy chuckled. "There's no room for you here." Following my mother-in-law, Amy declared, "We'll be using this space from now on, so please leave," leaving me utterly astonished. It seems my belongings were moved elsewhere by them. "Where did you take my things to?" I asked, only to be met with their laughter. "They're in a storage unit. If you don't collect them within a week, we'll dispose of them, they responded, with my mother-in-law tossing a paper with the storage details at me. Catching the fluttering paper, I looked at my mother-in-law and Amy. Now, only the three of us were in the house, and confronting them would mean a certain defeat. Thus, my only option was to leave. Understood. Take care. With those words, I gathered my remaining belongings and returned to my parents' home. However, I couldn't just do nothing. I immediately reported the situation to Fred, who was just as shocked, exclaiming, "What the heck?" Lately, we had been discussing how to get my mother-in-law out of the house when she wasn't around, but I never imagined I would be the one getting expelled. I've reached my limit, so I'm going to take some drastic measures. Are you okay with that, Fred? I asked. He sighed. Yes, that seems best. Both Mom and Amy have gone too far. It's time they learn their lesson, he agreed. Having received Fred's consent, I immediately contacted my cousin, whom I used to communicate with before moving to the 5-room house. This cousin was overseas, but after catching up and explaining the situation to him, he became as indignant as if the mistreatment I received from my mother-in-law and Amy was directed at him. What are they thinking? Using the house I lent to you for their nonsense. Unacceptable. As the owner, I'll kick them out. The house we were living in wasn't in our name but was actually owned by my cousin. Owning a house had been his dream for years, which he finally realized a year ago. However, he had to move abroad for work, leaving the house unoccupied. He offered, "Could you look after the house until I return? I'll make the rent cheap." Eventually, to avoid the hassle of monthly payments, we paid 3 years' rent up front. Thus, saying we bought the house wasn't entirely false. Unaware of this, my mother-in-law and Amy kicked me out. My cousin, who cherishes me like a sister, would not overlook this. Though he was supposed to be overseas, the next day, about 10 robust men visited the house, causing my mother-in-law and Amy to tremble in fear. "Why are you trespassing? Is this because of Mandy? I'll call the police." My mother-in-law screamed, but one man stepped forward. "The owner of this house isn't you. Let me make it clear. This house is owned by Mandy's cousin, and while he's abroad, Mandy and her husband were just managing and living here. You have no right to be here," he bellowed. My mother-in-law was terrified, but Amy defiantly asked, "What about our father then? He lived here too." The man snorted. "We had confirmation from Mandy before letting that man stay. No such confirmation was given for you two." Dismissing them. Without a chance to argue back, the men promptly evicted my mother-in-law and Amy. After I was expelled, they had celebrated, leaving the house in a mess. The men threw their belongings outside and yelled, "This mess is your fault," forcing them to clean up. And accustomed to cleaning, my mother-in-law and Amy were constantly reprimanded by the men. Eventually, they were warned, "You've complained about the house. There are damages on the walls and floors. Why is the kitchen so scorched? We'll be demanding compensation, so wait for our contact." We had taken photos of the house's condition right after my mother-in-law arrived, so we could prove which damages were their fault. They must have known they were responsible for the mess. After being evicted and faced with a compensation claim, my mother-in-law and Amy reached out to me and my cousin, the house owner. After spending a day cleaning, they stayed at a relative's house and finally contacted me the day after next. But far from showing remorse, they were still aggressive, accusing, "Why didn't you tell us from the beginning? If you had informed us first, this wouldn't have happened." I sighed deeply. Everyone in the room could hear as I put the phone on speaker mode. Internally, I thought, these people never learn, and said, "Mother, there's someone here who wants to talk to you," handing the smartphone to my cousin who had unexpectedly returned from overseas. My cousin, with a stern voice over the phone, said, "What kind of attitude is that? You trash my house and still speak like that. It seems the lesson with my former rugby mates wasn't enough for you," he told my mother-in-law in a grave tone. My mother-in-law, not expecting my cousin to be nearby, was shocked and then consistently begged for the compensation to be waived. However, my cousin dismissed her, saying, "You're an adult. You need to take responsibility for your actions," and hung up the phone. Since my cousin has no immediate plans to return to the US, he decided to sell the 5-room house after getting it cleaned. My mother-in-law and Amy paid the cleaning and inconvenience fees, which was a significant burden for them as they were unemployed and working part-time respectively. Then Amy turned to her boyfriend for help. Well, it seems Amy had unilaterally ended things with her boyfriend's family due to incompatible values and showed up at our place. But since she had no money, she had no choice but to rely on him. As a result, after helping with the money, he demanded, "Since I helped you financially, become my wife and bear my children." Amy had no choice but to marry him. And it seems my mother-in-law put her to work at their home. It's a terrible situation, but neither Fred nor I have any intention to help. As for us, the construction of our new home that we had been planning since living in my cousin's house is complete, and we've finally started our life here. We haven't shared our address with relatives, so there's no worry about my mother-in-law or Amy showing up unexpectedly, and we're enjoying peaceful days. Your presence is no longer needed. Really? How long do you plan to stay here? Leave this house quickly. You incompetent leech living off the money Steve left behind. Disappear. You're in the way. What? Can I really leave? Won't you regret this later? Of course. Don't make me repeat myself. I am Emma, 34 years old, working in the medical field. I met my husband, Steve, a 37-year-old surgeon, 2 years ago at the hospital we both worked at, and we got married. Upon marrying, I quit my job to focus on being a homemaker as per my husband's wish. Currently, I am 5 months pregnant and suffering from severe morning sickness. My husband is a respected surgeon, admired by his peers for his skill. He is kind, gentle, and loved by patients and hospital staff alike. Our marriage is strong, and he is incredibly supportive, actively helping with household chores without a single complaint. Despite his demanding job, his dedication to our family is something I am deeply grateful for. The only concern I have is related to my in-laws. Hey, Emma, I have a request. I'd like to live with my parents and my sister Abby. My dad needs care and I want to support them as much as possible. It will also reduce the burden on my mom. Plus, with a baby on the way, having extra hands will be helpful for you, and it might make it easier for you to return to work. What do you think? That sounds good to me. I'm okay with it. Steve's family is kind, and if I can help take care of your father, it will lighten the load on your mom and Abby. Thank you, Emma. That means a lot to me. My mother-in-law has always been kind to me, and my sister-in-law Abby left a good impression during our family's meeting and our wedding, so I was confident we could build a good relationship. Thus, upon getting married, I started living with my in-laws and sister-in-law Abby. However, this shared living situation would soon change my life. One day, not long after we started living together, I was lying in bed in my room, still suffering from severe morning sickness, when I was called to the living room by my mother-in-law. My husband had left for work early in the morning, and my father-in-law was resting in another room, so it was just me, my mother-in-law, and sister-in-law Abby in the living room. My mother-in-law, usually calm, looked stern. Feeling tense, she suddenly spoke up. Emma, you're hardly managing the household chores, and yet you're lazing around in bed? Since you're not paying rent, I want you to contribute $5,000 to the household every month. This was the start of an incomprehensible discussion. I'm sorry, I've been suffering from continuous morning sickness and have hardly been able to get out of bed. I feel terrible for relying so much on you and Abby for household chores, but I thought I was contributing enough each month. Well, enough. You think a mere $2,000 is enough? We're letting you live here because we thought you'd help with the housework and take care of our father. You're not helping at all. Why did my son even choose someone like you as his wife? There's no need to say something so harsh. When I was young, regardless of morning sickness or anything else, I dedicated myself to my new family. You need to put in more effort. And I'm tired of taking care of that man. That's why I suggested to Steve that we all live together. Steve is a doctor, so $5,000 a month shouldn't be a big deal, right? Well then, I'm counting on you. We're going out for a bit, so take care of the housework and take care of our father. Useless sister-in-law. Saying this, the two of them left. I was shocked by their sudden change of attitude, as I thought we were getting along well. Despite not feeling well, I couldn't just sit around. So I managed to suppress my discomfort from the morning sickness and started cleaning, doing laundry, and preparing meals for my father-in-law. My father-in-law, though unable to move his lower body, did not show signs of dementia and communicated well. He seemed to feel guilty about me taking care of everything alone, especially considering my pregnancy. I'm truly sorry that you have to take on everything, Emma. Considering the baby and your own health, I wish it wasn't so burdensome for you. It's okay. Steve is very supportive, so I don't feel burdened at all. Besides, I enjoy the time I spend talking with you. I'm really grateful, my father-in-law said, tears welling up in his eyes, expressing his gratitude. That evening, when my husband returned home, I told him about the demand from my mother-in-law and Abby for a monthly contribution of $5,000. However, I didn't mention their change in attitude, not wanting to worry him. $5,000, huh? Understood. Well, we are living here and my parents are living on their pension. Abby also has a regular work and doesn't have a stable income. My husband agreed to the monthly payment of $5,000 without hesitation, understanding the situation. Since my husband was okay with it, I reluctantly agreed as well. Then, one day, I received a call that my husband had collapsed at the hospital while at work. Worried sick, I managed to calm my panic enough to find out which hospital he was taken to, and immediately called a taxi to rush there. Steve was already unconscious during the transport, and tears threatened to spill in the taxi. My mind was filled with pessimistic thoughts, hoping against hope that he would be okay. But, despite my wishes, Steve passed away shortly after we arrived at the hospital from an acute heart attack. He had left the house that morning with his usual kind smile, making it hard to accept the reality. Steve was only 37 years old. He had his whole life ahead of him, passionate about his work and excited to become a father soon. The thought of not being able to introduce our child to his or her father left me sobbing beside his body. Time passed, and my mother-in-law and Abby arrived at the hospital. My father-in-law had to stay home, so a helper was arranged urgently. Oh, I can't believe this. My dear Steve, why a heart attack? Really? This is all Emma's fault. Emma, if you had noticed Steve's health issues sooner, this tragedy wouldn't have happened. You're a disaster. Mom is right. The reason my brother died is because you came into our house. I'll never forgive you for taking him away. I'm truly sorry. Having just lost my husband, my heart was too broken to argue with them. I could only apologize. Maybe it was all my fault. If only I had noticed something was wrong with Steve sooner, he might still be alive. I was tormented by this thought for a while. Eventually, the funeral was held. Many of Steve's friends and colleagues came to say their goodbyes. I felt a profound loss and sorrow from the respect people had for my husband. But I knew I couldn't grieve forever. I have to become stronger for the sake of our child that's about to be born. I resolved. However, my resolve was quickly shattered by my in-laws' words. Look, Emma, just because Steve has passed away doesn't mean you're thinking of going back to your parents' house, right? Well, I'm expecting soon, and the morning sickness hasn't ended, so I might return to my parents' house a bit earlier. What? If you go back to your parents, what will happen to the daily routine here? Who will take care of Dad? You think you can just leave irresponsibly just because my brother died? As for taking care of Dad, hiring a helper could lessen the burden. Hiring a helper? What are you thinking? As long as you're here, there's no need for outside help. That's a waste of money. Angered by their words, I responded, may I remind you, my mother-in-law is almost always home, and Abby only works 3 days a week on a non-regular basis. Aren't you two perfectly capable of handling the household and taking care of Dad? My mother-in-law retorted, I'm busy with community activities and hobbies. I don't have time to do housework, let alone care for him. She spends her time at home just watching TV and lounging around, using any excuse to shift all responsibility onto me. On my days off from my part-time job, I'm busy looking for a marriage partner. I can't spare any effort or money on beauty treatments to find a handsome, high-earning man. Oh, I just don't have enough time. Unlike you, who can stay home all day? Abby, significantly overweight and far from the beauty ideal she claimed, bafflingly exuded confidence from nowhere. And Emma, it's not an exaggeration to say Steve's death is your fault. So, you'll continue to take care of the household and Dad, and will also need the same $5,000 a month for living expenses. We've heard about the savings Steve left behind, so paying shouldn't be an issue, right? But I don't have an income right now, and with the baby coming, expenses will increase. I wanted to save Steve's money for our child's future. Oh, but is that child really Steve's? Could it be someone else's? That's really funny. Really? Emma, you're so vulgar. Then it's even more unthinkable to use Steve's money for a child that might not be his. Please wait. This child is indeed Steve's. It's terrible to say such things. But realizing arguing was futile, I gave up on going back to my parents and resigned myself to contributing $5,000 a month for living expenses, continuing the household chores and caring for my father-in-law. It seems excessive for a family of 4 to need that much, especially with pension income. Though I have some savings, I didn't want to dip into the inheritance Steve left, preferring to save it for our child's future. Moreover, returning to my parents would leave my father-in-law without proper care. If help or support isn't an option, going back isn't either. My belly is getting heavier and it's tough, but it seems like I have no choice but to handle the household chores and caregiving on my own. I managed the household and caregiving tasks as best as I could, using delivery services for grocery shopping to keep it unnoticed by my mother-in-law and Abby. One day, while preparing a meal for my father-in-law, an incident occurred. Hey, Emma, can I talk to you for a moment? There's something I need to tell you. Yes, what is it? At that moment, my mother-in-law and Abby were out, and it was just my father-in-law and me at home. I wanted to tell you something while they're not around. Please listen to this. He handed me a voice recorder, and the moment I pressed play, I was shocked. Is this my mother-in-law and Abby's voices? What are they saying? I can't believe this. I heard a conversation between my mother-in-law and Abby. I felt a growing outrage towards them, and it felt like something inside me broke. Unforgivable, absolutely not. From there, my father-in-law and I devised a plan, and I was determined to carry it out. We waited for the night to come. When my mother-in-law and Abby returned home happily, I made them an offer. Mother, Abby, as a token of my gratitude, how about a trip just for the two of you? Of course, my father-in-law and I will stay here. A trip. Wonderful. I want it to be abroad. Emma, that's a great idea. How about inviting 2 friends and all of us going to Europe? Of course, it's fine to invite your friends. Why don't you take a little break for about 2 weeks? Emma, you do come up with good suggestions sometimes. The thought of getting away from this depressing daughter-in-law and that old man, what unexpected happiness. As a result, they planned a 2-week trip to Europe, including their friends, 1 month later, without suspecting our plan. Then, the day of their trip arrived. After seeing off the 2 who left in high spirits, I immediately started preparing to leave this home. Being in the later stages of pregnancy and unable to carry heavy items, I called my mother to help me. After telling my parents everything, they expressed their anger towards my mother-in-law and Abby but warmly welcomed me to come back home. Then, after completing the moving preparations, I expressed my gratitude to my father-in-law. Though it was for a short time, I am very grateful for your care. After Steve passed away, you were the only one who always spoke to me with warmth. I am the one who should be grateful, Emma, for your caregiving. I'll be living in a care facility from now on, so don't worry. All that's left is to wait for those 2 to receive their just desserts. 2 weeks passed, and the day they returned from their trip came. While I was peacefully staying at my parents' house, my phone rang. My mother-in-law's name appeared on the screen. When I answered, she demanded I return home immediately, so I reluctantly agreed. Welcome back, Mother. Did you enjoy your trip to Europe? Enjoyed it? That's not the point, Emma. We were happy to go on the trip you gifted us, but why are we being billed for it? There's a bill for $20,000. I thought it was lucky it only came to $20,000 for 4 of you. I was expecting it to easily exceed $30,000 with such luxurious accommodations. What are you talking about? Boyfriend? We just invited some friends from the neighborhood, and it was just the 4 of us. Oh, is that so? But I have evidence here. Please have a look at the envelope on the living room table. My mother-in-law and Abby were then confronted with a report from a detective. What is this? You tricked us by hiring a detective, you sly woman. No, it wasn't me who hired the detective. It was my father-in-law. What Dad did? Yes, it was actually my father-in-law who had requested the investigation. One day, he grew suspicious of my mother-in-law and Abby's behavior and installed a hidden microphone in the living room to eavesdrop on their conversations. Listen, Mom. Last night, I went on a date with a charming man who earns over $1 million a year. He's married, but he showed a lot of interest in me and came on to me strongly. I ended up not coming home until morning. I'll make him divorce his wife and take him for myself. That's wonderful, Abby. Go ahead and get that man for yourself. I also hope my wealthy lover will divorce his spouse soon and become mine alone. Then, eventually, we'll leave this place and start a luxurious life. In fact, they were involved with married men and planning to leave my father-in-law behind and move out of the house. Furious with this revelation, my father-in-law and I planned the trip as a strategy. He expected them to bring their affairs along on the trip and hired a detective to investigate during their absence. The investigation revealed that the friends accompanying my other-in-law and Abby on the trip were, in fact, their extramarital lovers. Well, now that it's out, there's nothing else to do but to give up. I'm going to divorce your father and kick that man out of the house. And you, Emma, are no longer needed here. Really? How long do you plan to stay? Leave this house immediately. Leave, you worthless person living off the money Steve left behind. What? Can I really leave? Won't you regret this later? Of course. Don't make me repeat myself. Also, regarding the cost of the trip, you will be bearing it yourself. While I suggested the trip, I never mentioned it would be a gift. Humph. If it's about $20,000, I'll just have my wealthy lover pay for it. Is that so? Additionally, my father-in-law has already moved to a facility. Thank you for everything. Goodbye, and please do as you wish. Thus, I returned to my parents' home, feeling refreshed. After spending some peaceful time at home, one day, my mother-in-law and Abby unexpectedly showed up at the entrance. Emma, we apologize for our behavior up to now. Please come back, sister. I sincerely apologize for everything I've said and done. We really want you back. Oh, what brings both of you here? Why has it come to this? Our relationships outside were exposed, and the spouses are demanding a large compensation from us. I live on a pension, and Abby is in irregular employment with little savings. We don't know how to handle this. In fact, my father-in-law had sent the detective's report to the families of the lovers, resulting in a massive demand for compensation from them. Additionally, they were being sued for compensation for infidelity by my father-in-law as well. Moreover, we haven't settled the $20,000 for the trip yet. Could you possibly share Steve's inheritance with us? I categorically refuse. You treated me like a servant all this time. I cannot forgive you. Besides, the monthly living expenses of $5,000 were being paid out of my own savings, not from Steve's inheritance. What? You had that much in savings? I thought you worked in medical administration at a hospital. No, my daughter is a distinguished doctor at our hospital. My father, who is the director of a large hospital, appeared and informed them of the reality. Yes, I am his daughter and was working as a surgeon, recognized for my achievements and expected to succeed him as the director of the hospital. Steve and I were united by a romance that began at the same workplace. Recognizing the situation, my mother-in-law said, "Then, all the more reason we want you to come back, Emma. The future director of the hospital, please save us from our plight. We're going to suffer under debt. Please help us." Sister-in-law, they pleaded with tears. However, I firmly refused and securely locked the door. The commotion led to a neighbor calling the police, and they were eventually taken away in a police car. Later, my mother-in-law and Abby were demanded to pay compensation by the spouses of their lovers. My mother-in-law also had to pay compensation to my father-in-law. They were also reminded to pay for the trip, resulting in significant debt. The scandal spread throughout the neighborhood, forcing them to move. They now live in a small apartment, juggling multiple jobs to pay off their debts. A deserved outcome. As for my father-in-law, his divorce was successfully finalized, and he enjoys a stress-free life in a care facility. As for me, I safely gave birth to a girl and am living a fulfilling life with the support of my parents. Next month, I plan to return to work, placing my daughter in daycare. I intend to carry on Steve's legacy, moving forward as both a doctor and a mother.